So... Seekers of the Storm, huh? It's been a few weeks since the release of Seekers of the Storm. We haven't had a content update this big in years, and boy am I eager to talk about it because there is a lot to talk about. But first, let's address the elephant in the room. The launch of this DLC, more specifically the update that came along with it, was god-awful. Riddled with bugs, broken features, soft locks. This is a horrid state for the DLC to launch in. I don't really blame anyone that refunded the DLC, because I did. The state of the DLC and its bugs ranges from pretty noticeable minor issues to just straight up unplayable. Sorry, Xbox users. Now, most of you might be wondering, how could this have possibly happened? And well, it's easy to chalk it up to corporate greed, Randy Pitchfork, Gearbox is evil. That doesn't really give us an answer. There's a great interview with one of the developers of Risk of Rain Returns going around by CrabGod on Twitter that sums things up pretty well, explaining that things look just as, if not more polished than now a few months ago, and that console parity wasn't really a thing planned until very late into development. My theory as to why this might have happened is that the Take-Two acquisition brought with it the need for console parity, not to mention the high likelihood that some of the developers got lost during the acquisition. This left the remaining team with a quite frankly impossible task of rewriting the entire DLC for it to work both on PC and console with a decreased staff team on a tight deadline. The only way they could have realistically achieved that is by working on a prototype build of the game that they knew at least functioned both on PC and console, thus the frame rate issues. Console is basically always frame capped. Does this excuse the state the DLC is in? No, absolutely not. But it really helps us understand what happened and gives us some form of ground to stand on. Okay, while I was editing this video, a patch dropped with a lot of bug fixes, so I'm gonna quickly touch up on that. I definitely didn't expect them to drop a patch this big, this fast. Pretty much every major issue with the DLC has been fixed. Sure, this should have been how the DLC had launched from the start, but I do have to commend them for seeming like they actually care about the game. I mean, they even dropped changes like sonorous whispers, and the little statement they have at the start seems pretty genuine. I just hope that they can actually follow through with all this. But other than that, good patch. Now, this messy launch has already been talked to death by a lot of people in the community. For good reason, too. But I'm not here to keep beating that dead horse. See, in the shadow of the bug problem, people lost focus on another part of the DLC. The actual content of the DLC. And that's what I want to talk about today, because I have a lot of opinions I'd like to share over the DLC, as well as feedback I would like Gearbox to hear out. Maybe? Please? Pretty please, Gearbox? So, here we are. A full complete review of the content of Seekers of the Storm. I'll be talking about what I like, what I don't like, what I think is mediocre, and what I think could be executed better. Now, let's begin talking about something that I believe is the biggest, strongest card for the DLC. The stage. Hey, that's my fucking line! Stages in Seekers of the Storm are just flat out good. Alright, I'll elaborate. Gearbox really poured their all into these stages, and it really shows because the level of quality of these is beyond good. I love every single new environment they add into this game, and all of them just look gorgeous. The stage tweaks are also quite nifty, changing stuff like the Sundered Grove geometry from time to time, Bulwark's Embry getting variants which I did not expect, and of course the new night variants of stages, which I really did hope would get more of, but unfortunately didn't, which is a bummer. That's a problem with the DLC as a whole. It does feel like we didn't get that much content compared to the previous expansion. But we'll look at that in the greater detail later. Let's look at the maps. Shattered Abodes might honestly be one of my favorite stage ones. It's aesthetically beautiful, the soundtrack fucks, and isn't too difficult to navigate. The one thing I'll say is that it feels considerably bigger than most stages, which does make stage 1 a little slower. Same kind of goes for Helmuth Hatchery, the new stage 5. This stage is huge, straight up massive, which does make it pretty hard to walk around in. That paired with the fact that it's dark as fuck, as well as the generally pretty aggressive geometry, not that great of a time to walk around in. But aesthetically, I like how it looks, and the new Stage 5 is something we haven't seen before. Not even Survivors of the Void dared to do that, so hey, appreciate the balls Gearbox had. And the verticality of the stage is unlike anything we've seen before, which makes it stand out even more. While we're here though, I'd like to touch up on the different interactables they added. Realistically, they only added 3. The Aurelianite Geodes, Halcyon Shrines, and the Shrine of Shaping. The Halcyon Shrines are genuinely, unironically, one of my favorite additions to the DLC. Sure, it's just another pillar to charge, but I love mid-run optional objectives, and needing to charge it with gold makes it stand out as its own thing. Void Seeds planted that seed first, then Halcyon Shrines kind of follow on those footsteps. It's a fun challenge and gives super good rewards. Geodes aren't really noteworthy. They cleanse debuffs, only really appear on the False Sun stage. They're cool. Shrine of Shaping is interesting. It gives you and your allies an extra life at the cost of 30% of your max HP in the form of Curse. I like it. It's not bad and provides a safety net for you and your friends on the stage. Though honestly, it's kind of a no-brainer to take considering you get an extra life and the curse goes away when you revive. But it's always nice to see one of these, and they're not exactly very common, so I'll let it slide. Related to the stages on Halcyon Shrines is the new green portal. This is a 2-stage alternate path leading up to the new boss that you can take from stage 1. And oh my god, finally! Being able to choose a forking path that has a significant changes to your run is something I absolutely wanted out of the game, and I'm really glad we get something like that. Reformed Altar and Treeborn Colony are both really cool stages, though I feel like Treeborn might be a little bit small, but other than that, no comment. Beautiful as always, and really fun to navigate. One thing though, the path could have used an extra stage. Though I suppose going from False Sun to Mythics right away would have been a little jarring, but it just kind of feels too short. Let's talk about the False Sun. Prime Meridian, again, gorgeous stage, really cool, looks like a fucking Elden Ring map, though those thunderbolts feel really bad to dodge. It's because they extend all the way up, which, while it does make sense for them to do that, in reality it feels, bad. It feels bad. As well as that, the geometry is harsh. I am pretty sure you can maneuver around it with low movement speed, though I'm sure the thunderbolts beg to differ. As for the fight itself, long story short, it's aight. It's got the same feel as the Mythics fight, but does throw in his own special tricks. There's some problems with it. Some attacks are poorly telegraphed and he deals a fuck ton of damage, but it's usually not that big of a deal. It feels really relentless and the map is crowded with stuff, which honestly, I like a lot. There's only 2 things that I feel sour the fight: the laser attack and the final phase. I firmly believe that this laser is overtuned as fuck. Dude, that fucking attack! You stand even 1 second in its line of sight and it just obliterates you immediately. It deals a stupid high amount of damage. In my runs, this laser had enough damage to kill characters like 5 times over. It's insane. And the only things you get to counter it is this small ass pillar that False Sun can just easily walk around, and a rock, I guess. Then there's the final phase. I actually really like it being this bullet hell that you need to avoid until you get your abilities back, and makes for a really cool contrast between Mithrix stealing your items and False Sun stealing your abilities. Aurelianite turning on you is also a really neat surprise. This fight does quite a bit to stand apart from Mithrix and Providence without sacrificing that essence that makes those fights. The problem I have with it is that it's a little unclear how to get your abilities back. Maybe I'm just stupid, but it took me multiple tries for me to get this part of the fight. Maybe pinging the gold clumps would be a good fix. I don't know. But either way, it's kind of confusing when you get your abilities snatched and how to get them back. Besides that though, I like False Sun. I always wanted some sort of mid-run boss, and this is just that. I'll gladly take him over Voidling any day of the week if they just nerf him a little bit. The new artifact you get from beating him is pretty cool as well. Feels a bit like a cheaty artifact, like how Delusion was, but who cares? It's optional, it's fun. On top of that, every survivor outside of Seekers of the Storm, yes, even the survivors of the Void ones, get a skin for killing False Sun, which I am really glad they did. I'm always glad to have more objectives to complete. Adds more replay value to the game, and I like that. Though I am a little bit sad the new survivors didn't get any skins for False Sun. Kind of a bummer. As for the skins themselves, it's personal preference whether you like them or not. Speaking of which, let's take a dive into the characters, shall we? We got 3 characters with the DLC: Seeker, Chef, and a secret third thing. Seeker is the first survivor we saw, the one that comes pre-packaged with the DLC. Her whole gimmick is with Meditate, giving her improved abilities the more you use it, as well as being able to heal and revive players. We saw something similar to this with Bandit's Desperado, but whereas that is an alternate ability, this is the whole ass kit. One thing I will say is that I really wish Tranquility was a tad more powerful. A snowball character that gets stronger as the stage goes on is really cool. I just wish it actually felt like a snowball instead of a wet fart. Right now the stat increases of Tranquility are a really weird case-by-case basis, and I don't know if I really like that. Not to mention there are generally very minor tweaks to the ability. Her damage also feels really low, especially with the first secondary. Her alt secondary fixes most of the damage problems. It's actually surprisingly strong, and the effects it has with Tranquility are actually pretty darn cool. Tranquility is a good idea, I just think it needed to be leaned into a little harder. As for her support capabilities, they feel kind of limited in my opinion. Your teammates need to be in range of Meditate, and you only get one revive per stage, so it feels kind of weak. Although I haven't really played much with Support Seeker to have a good understanding of her support capabilities. Seeker is a character that tries to be both a snowball character and a support character, and doesn't really commit to either path. She has a solid foundation, she just needs to be a little stronger in either one of their regards in order to truly shine. Make her able to revive indefinitely, make her healing bubble a little larger, make Tranquility increase base damage, I don't know, she just needs a little push that makes her a tad bit stronger. If she leaned harder into either one of these ideas, she would feel way better, but as she stands right now, her kit kind of doesn't convey a feeling of anything. Now, let's go from a character with mediocre execution to a character that I actually think executes its ideas really well. False Sun. Now, before playing him, I've been hearing some pretty bad things regarding him. That he looks unfinished, that he's just a worse paladin, that he's just flat out bad, and honestly, he might be my favorite character in the DLC. Now, I'm not gonna deny that he does have his clunk, especially the charge attack of his primary. Oh, it feels bad. But it's not nearly as bad as people have made it out to be, honestly. And I love his growth mechanic. Gaining extra stats of your abilities based on your max HP is genius. It makes items you'd never even think of picking up actually useful. Deadass, while playing, I said out loud, I need me some bison steak, and honestly, I never thought I'd say that unironically. His lunar spike gimmick is also really interesting, giving you offensive buffs by holding onto them and defensive buff by throwing them out, and that is such a good mechanic that makes you think about how you use your abilities. It's not a mindless M2, there's actual strategy involved with them. On its own, these two gimmicks feel really cool, but together, they synergize so fucking well and just make False Sun so fucking unique. I really love his kit, and he feels really fun to play. Again, people are saying that he feels like a worse paladin, and well, yeah, they're both slow bruisers and have an abrupt dash. That's kind of where their similarities end. And yeah, while there is still a little bit of jank here and there, he's a really fun survivor with a one-of-a-kind kit. I'm pleasantly surprised with this character, I gotta say. Chef. Fundamentally, Chef is a good survivor. I really like how hard they lean into his combo mechanics, encouraging using different skills in succession in order to get better wards. As a translation from Risk of Rain 1 to Risk of Rain 2, I feel like he was adapted pretty uniquely. It's still Chef, but this interpretation is noticeably different, leaning harder into his whole combo mechanics. I like it. It's just in the little things where it starts to fall off. How you have to manually recall every use of your M1, how your M2 cannot be aimed and is tied to your character rotation, how your shift... Okay, the shift is fine. How Glaze takes a good second to come out, how short the radius of the food pickups is. It all just contributes to him feeling like shit. Seer is probably the worst offender here. It is really short range, cannot be cancelled, cannot be aimed, has a 2-second delay after finishing for some fucking reason. It just feels god-awful to use. It's these small little problems that pile up and ruin Chef for me. I'm sure he's going to be better once the patches start to roll out, but for now, I'm not convinced. Now, let's focus our attention from the best aspects of the DLC to the mediocre ones. The items of the DLC are fine for the most part. There's clearly some fun ideas in here, but the execution of them is just not that good. Let's go through every single one, because clearly this video is not long enough. Warp Deco, conceptually, it's fine. It's not a bad effect at all and synergizes with stuff like Medkit and Tougher Times. maybe even repulsion armor. It just kind of feels bad seeing your inevitable doom approaching and not being able to do anything about it. Kinda why collapse also feels bad. If I had to change anything, I would make the second hit not be able to kill. It'd be a little broken, sure, but it'd go a long way making the item feel better and stop it from feeling like bullshit. Chronic Expansion is just a good item in my opinion. The second damage buff lasting as long as you're in combat encourages risky play for a good payout. I think the buff it gives you should be a little bit stronger, but other than that, no complaints. Knockback Fin, what's the purpose of this item? Yeah, this item's just flat out useless. Maybe knocking them in the air might make them take a little fall damage, but like, why? However, the effect is really funny. I think adding an additional effect on top of the launching enemies part would go far to make this item way better. What if it gave additional crit chance to airborne enemies? That'd be pretty cool, right? Bolstering Lantern conceptually is pretty okay. Extra damage at low health is a little uninspired. Would have preferred it to be something like attack speed, honestly. Something more tangible than just flat out damage. My problem with it is that staying below 50% health is usually not very likely because either you're gonna heal it back in a bit, or you're gonna die. If I wanted to improve this item, I'd make it linger for like 2 seconds after going above 50% HP. That way the effect can trigger more times than before and you'd get enough time to utilize the effect. You know what? I'm starting to warm up a little bit to Antler Shield. Sure, it's still not good, but it has just enough to differentiate it from Razor Wire. The problem it has right now is that 10% of damage taken is really low. Proportionally, survivors have way less health than enemies do, so 10% of the damage enemies deal to you isn't nearly as much as 10% of the damage you deal to them. Bumping that up to 50% for the first stack, or even 100% will make this item significantly better. Chancellor is cool. I like the idea of making the Shrine of Chance a little better. I haven't really gotten to test out the item, so I'm still not sure, but so far, in theory, I really like this item. You know, it's just a little guy. It's just a little guy. Prayer Beads is actually a really interesting item. The concept of an item you want to get rid of later on in the run is a really unique idea, as well as adding another item based on experience. We don't really have that many items that work off of that. I think only Warbender does that, so getting another one is really cool. I just really wish I could actually know what stats get increased by the item. I'd like to go on a tangent to talk about the decrease in quality of the logbooks compared to the base game. At worst, it's just slight inconsistencies of a few nonsensical bits, and at worst, the item is completely incomprehensible. The actual stories of the logbooks are fine, but it's just the little things like phrasing that feel odd. Anyways, Luminous Shot is an item that I see get dissed on a lot, and I actually really like it. It's a pretty unique way to give damage to your primary and serves as a pretty cool combo option. Really makes you utilize your whole kit for a little more damage. Maybe it could do with a damage buff, but conceptually, I really like it. Now, for the item everyone likes, Sailstar. And yeah, it's one of the best in DLC. It is a very simple but surprisingly well executed effect. I really like how you have to think about which chest to open first, encouraging better macroing and stage scouting to maximize the reward. And it would have been so easy for the stacking effect to outright give you more items, which would have made Sailstar the most broken item in the game. Certainly they wouldn't do that, but they balanced it in a pretty cool way, I'm not gonna lie. Bravo to Gearbox for this one. Unstable Transmitter is funny. The position it teleports you to has a 50% chance to either save you or leave you in a worse spot than before, and honestly, I think that's kind of funny. It is a little bit disorienting though. I have to take a good second to process where the hell I ended up before I get my bearings. The explosion is a pretty cool bonus, but it might need a damage buff, like half of the items, but definitely helps you saving yourself. Noxious Storm pisses me off. This item is incredibly weak. Getting hit in this game is the one thing you don't want. So what does this item give you when you get hit? 2 stacks of bleed or 1 single stack of whatever debuffs the enemy has. For 90% of the status effects, that is like nothing. Only thing I see it being good for is Shattering Justice maybe, but even then, this item's like a nice bonus at best. This shit, doo-doo. Although I can commend that they at least tried to not make this item completely useless by itself. Unlike some items. Growth Nectar is interesting. It's like a reverse Death Mark. This This should have been a void item, I'm not gonna lie. Other than that, this item's aight. Kinda bad on the early game, kinda cracked on the late game. Interesting idea, but I don't really know. It's a fine red. Warbones is up next.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
3 chests worth of gold? That's like, not a whole lot. Sure, it speeds up farming, but 75 gold? As a red? This thing is not only really boring for a red item, it is also really fucking bad. If I reworked it, I'd use the free purchase mechanic introduced with the new Lunar, which we'll talk about later, and make it 3 free purchases instead. It still wouldn't be great, but it'd at least be a little bit more interesting than what we currently have. What is this logbook, bro? What is this? What does this mean? What do you mean, overspill? Yeah, remember the straight up incomprehensible logbook I was talking about earlier? Yeah, this is it. What the item is meant to say is that it has a chance to proc a big ass meteor with the chance of activating it and its damage increasing with the damage of the hit that procced it. If you actually understand what the logbook entry is trying to say, this item is actually pretty fucking cool. A proc item that benefits from slow, hard-hitting effects rather than small procs is a genius idea, honestly. I've got to commit Gearbox for this one. Definitely one of the better items in the DLC. It's just that logbook entry that really fucks everyone up and makes this item so hard to understand. I had to rewrite the whole section for Sonorous Whispers because the item got nerfed on the first patch, which I did not expect them to do that at all. I had like a really funny joke and everything, and now I have to throw it in the trash because they changed it. Before, the item had a 15% chance to drop an item on elite kill, and that got reduced to 4%. 15% was broken. But 4% is actually pretty reasonable. Other than it being busted for the first few days, I find this item pretty cool actually. It brings in the boss dropping items mechanic from Risk of Rain 1 back, as well as 56 Leaf Clover, and kind of meshes them both together. It's a really fun and interesting gimmick, and it's still quite strong even after the nerfs. A really fun red that pays homage to the classic. Good addition. Final red is the electric boomerang, and I gotta say, it's pretty cool. I really like it personally. It's always nice to have more proc items, and this one does it a pretty unique way, with it being a multi-hit like Polyloot, but, you know, actually kind of rare. Come to think of it, this is kind of another take on Polyloot. People are really sleeping on stuns, side note. Aside from boss enemies, this thing consistently keeps enemies stun locked, which is super useful. Really good item, I gotta say. At first I thought long-standing Solitude was garbage, but after playing with it for a little bit, it started to grow on me. It makes up for the fact that you get significantly fewer items by basically keeping you like 5 or 10 levels ahead of the enemies at all times, which means this item is basically sacrificing the versatility of items for sweet, sweet raw damage. It's an interesting gimmick that completely changes up how you play the game. It's strange though. It is really good in the early game, fucking sucks by around stage 3, and then goes back to being cracked then on. Sure, it's kind of completely unbearable without picking up any items that give you gold like Brutal Crown or Gore's Tome, but once you actually start building it right, it's actually really cool and pretty strong, surprisingly. One problem though. The level cap. Yeah, so because of how integers work, the player level is kind of hard capped at 94. Usually this wouldn't be a problem, but because long-lasting Solitude gives you so much XP, it ends up hitting the cap by around halfway through the second loop. That means that after the second loop, you cannot buy anything anymore, so either tough it out or find a cleansing pool. It'd go a long way to give this item an alternative way to generate free unlocks. Maybe every 100 gold worth of XP, or maybe after hitting the teleporter. I don't know, just something so that this situation doesn't really happen anymore. Also, it making everything more expensive when picked up. Why? You're only fucking over your own teammates if you pick up more stacks. It doesn't affect you at all, so why even make it a thing? Transcendence gets away with not having graded debuffs with more stacks, and you don't see anyone complaining. Even with this, it's still a no-brainer to get more stacks of this item. In fact, having more stacks of long-standing Solitude makes the item go from bad to actually kind of okay in some scenarios. Finally, we have the new equipment. The Seed of Life. It's an orange Dios. Not a bad equipment. It's welcome to have more ways for your friends to be actually able to play the game, and hey, you're giving up a precious equipment slot you could be using for a credit card, a tricorn, a healing equipment, or a damage equipment for an extra life, which, yeah, that is a pretty heavy cost. I kinda like it, although they kinda forgot to take it out of the bottled chaos pool, so oops. Also, I lied because its consumed version actually exists and is actually somewhat useful. It drops some healing orbs on the ground. Its cooldown is super short, so it could be good for Warhorn procs, but other than that, nothing groundbreaking. Cool bonus though. Whew. And with that, I've officially talked about every item in the DLC. Looking back at them, there's actually not a whole lot of items, even compared to Survivors of the Void, that still beats it by 3 more lunars and more equipment items. That's a problem with the DLC. The quantity of stuff we got, while still okay, kind of falls behind the amount of content that SOTV added. This is more evident with the enemies, as while in Survivors of the Void we got 11 new enemies, in Seekers of the Storm we only got 3. On one hand, children are probably the best mob they added to the DLC. They throw out a slow-moving projectile that proves as a constant yet easily avoidable threat, just putting pressure on the player. I really like how they were implemented these kind of annoying constant threats on the battlefield. On their own, they're not really dangerous, but left unchecked they can cause some serious havoc. Scorched worms, on the other hand, I don't like them at all. They're tanky, they bury into the ground and become invincible, they pop out of nowhere dealing damage, they essentially are better mini mushrooms, their animations look kinda weird. I don't know, they kinda stink, I'm not gonna lie. And finally, Halcyonites. They're fine. Again, conceptually not a bad enemy, they serve as a good mini boss for the Halcyon shrines, but right now they are super buggy, so it kinda sours them. Bye-bye! Can't really say much more than that. And again, compared to Survivors of the Void, we got way more. Void items as a whole new item gimmick, a whole ass game mode, an actual teleporter boss, and I know I'm comparing Seekers of the Storm a lot to Survivors of the Void, but that's because they're both the exact same price. You should be getting the same quantity and quality of content for both, but you don't. You get quite a bit less stuff with Seekers of the Storm than Survivors of the Void. I think SOTS needs a price reduction, at least for now. Bring down the price from $15 to $10 and it might be pretty worth it, but for $50 you get quite a bit less content than expected. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's look at the elite aspects. They are... I'm pretty sure with these new elite types they try to make you more mindful of who you're shooting and how you're shooting, and while it's not a bad idea on paper, it kind of falls apart when you think about it for more than 2 seconds. Think about how many AoE items are in this game. Think about how many items just kind of hit things for you. Now what happens when the elite type specifically designed to be hit in a very specific way just gets hit by an ATG you cannot control? Gilded elite types are the less egregious elite they added. They pull up their bubble from time to time and hitting them while the bubble's up makes you lose money. This elite is not great. Apply 1 stack of bleed or burn to a gilded elite and you lose like your entire life savings. I'd be fine if you got your gold back after you kill the elite, but you don't. So you just kind of lose the gold. But you know what? It's fine. It's just a little annoying, but it isn't by any means run-ending. Twisted elites. Jesus Christ, what were they thinking with this one? On paper, sure. Making an elite type that you have to prioritize first over every other enemy, no matter what, is a fine idea. But reflecting damage? And this is a late game elite type. Think of it this way. You're fighting a boss, and a Twisted Elite spawns as you proc bleed on the boss. The boss is in the Twisted Bubble. You're now dead, because you can't stop the DLT. Or a Ceremonial Dagger, one-shotting a beetle inside a Twisted Bubble across the map. Or even just fucking Tesla Coil! In the context of late-game Risk of Rain 2, it just does not work at all. It completely counters any and all God runs without any counterplay. While Celestines and Malachites were dangerous, they typically punish bad gameplay with a strong effect. Celestines hide the enemies so it prioritizes target priority and memory, while Malachites punish you for getting hit with no healing, which, if you're good at the game, can be easily countered while still being extremely detrimental. Twisted Elites punish you for playing the game well. Have a run that completely demolishes everything in its path? You know, the main appeal of the game? Guess what? You're dead! They seriously need a complete rework and genuinely make me not want to loop at all. Terrible design and does not mesh with Risk of Rain 2 at all. I think that's everything. So, that was all of the content in Seekers of the Storm. What's my consensus? It's fine. Clearly, there are good ideas here. I like a lot of the concepts and ideas that Gearbox puts on the table, but it is clear that either they weren't properly worked on or their execution is lackluster at best. They can make good stuff, the maps are fantastic, some of the items are good fun, and in general they have wonderful ideas for the game. They just haven't found their footing in the franchise yet. It's clear that they're still trying to see what works and what doesn't. Couple that with a very clearly rushed and botched release, and I can see why things turned out this way. That doesn't really excuse the lack of content in the DLC, or the god-awful release, or the lackluster content that is here, but I can see something that truly matters within the rubble. Passion. It's here! There is passion for this project, I can clearly tell. It's inspired, it's fresh, it's fun. But as Hopu said best, it has growing pains. A lot of them. Would I recommend the DLC? Once the patches roll out and the game's fixed, I'd say wait for a sale. You get a lot less content than Survivors of the Void, and the content here isn't of the highest quality possible, so I personally would only really recommend it once it's cheaper. But I can tell that Gearbox can do better than this. I want to believe that they can, and what they need in this time is constructive criticism about what works and what could be improved. And the most recent patch basically all but confirms that with the Sonorous Whisper nerf and the words they've been saying, they are listening to the feedback they've been getting, at least to some degree. It really does look like they at least care about the game and want to see it improve. At least that's what it seems from the dev team's part. I don't know about the executives. You never know with the executives. Now, I'm not saying that Gearbox is a bunch of saints. I mean, look at this release. And the scolding they're getting from the community is absolutely deserved. What I'm trying to say is that if we let Gearbox know how to steer things in the right direction, and if Gearbox listens to that feedback, they can make stuff that's above and beyond what this DLC could ever be. I am saying that I still have hope. I might be foolish for this, but if we try to be constructive, we might make a difference for the better, and that doomer posting about this franchise isn't going to get us anywhere. Again, the DLC has problems, a lot of them, but I want Gearbox to know that they can do better. I know it. Also, I really like ranting about this game, can you tell? Oh, by the way, fuck Randy.